Galactic Transit Station Omega-7 hung in the void like a metallic flower, its 17 arms stretching out to accommodate docking bays for 47 different species. Each arm pulsed with its own atmospheric requirements, gravity settings, and what the diplomatic corps politely called biological necessities. The methane-breathing Zephyrians needed their sulfurous yellow fog. The silicon-based quartzlings required temperatures that would melt most organic tissue. And the less said about the fungoid collective spore dispersal requirements, the better. Security Chief Korath of the reptilian Vorthax species flicked his forked tongue across his datapad, tasting the electromagnetic signatures of incoming vessels. 23 years of station security had taught him to categorize threats faster than most beings could blink. Plasma-wielding razor-claw pirates. Red alert. Diplomatic envoys with hidden agendas. Yellow caution. Teenage exchange students from backwater planets. Not even worth a second glance. Another mammal transfer, he hissed to his deputy, Sergeant Thren. Some species called human, from Sol 3. Probably another one of those furry, weak things that faint at the sight of their own blood. Thren's tail coiled in amusement. The file says they're requesting placement in the xenobiology program. What damage could a soft science student possibly do? Korath's laugh sounded like gravel in a blender. The most dangerous thing about mammals is their tendency to cry when they break a claw. Mark my words, Thren, we'll be calling medical to escort this one home within a week. The passenger transport Stellar Wanderer docked with the gentle thud that always made first-time visitors to Omega-7 nervous. Most species expected dramatic whooshes and explosive decompression sequences. Reality, as usual, proved disappointingly mundane. Maya Chen stepped off the transport with a duffel bag that had seen better decades and an expression that suggested mild curiosity rather than the wide-eyed wonder most new arrivals displayed. No gasping at the sight of tentacled molluscoids gliding past. No startled jumps when the 12-foot-tall Gorvani lumbered by. She simply looked around, nodded once, and walked toward the registration desk like she'd done this 1,000 times before. The station AI, a consciousness that prided itself on instantaneous threat assessment, performed its standard biological scan. Species human. Height 1.67 meters. Weight 58.7 kilograms. Threat level. The AI paused for exactly 0.003 seconds, which in computer terms was practically an eternity of uncertainty. Negligible. Classification, standard carbon-based bipedal mammal. Security clearance, basic student access. At the registration desk, a bored insectoid clerk named Vreeks buzzed through the paperwork without looking up. Name for the records? Maya Chen. Species origin? Earth. Sol system. Academic focus? Xenobiology with a minor in comparative physiology. Vreeks finally glanced up, his compound eyes reflecting the overhead lights like disco balls. First time off-world? Maya shrugged. First time this far from home. Well, try not to get eaten by anything. Next. The dormitory assignments placed Maya in Section C7, colloquially known as the zoo for its collection of species that didn't quite fit anywhere else. Her roommate was a sentient plant named Bloom who communicated through color changes and had the unfortunate habit of shedding pollen when excited. The room next door housed Zilf, a living crystal formation from the Hexari homeworld who refracted light into beautiful patterns and considered conversation a form of crude acoustic pollution. Across the hall lived Brant, a Gorvani whose species had evolved from something resembling a cross between a rhinoceros and a mountain. Brant stood 3 meters tall, weighed approximately half a ton, and had the personality of wet concrete. Most students gave him a wide berth, partly out of respect, mostly out of self-preservation. Maya introduced herself to each of them with the same calm politeness she might use when meeting distant relatives at a family reunion. No fear. No intimidation. Just a simple "Hi, I'm Maya," followed by whatever small talk seemed appropriate. While her new neighbors settled into their evening routines, Maya took a walk. She moved through the station's corridors with the easy stride of someone taking a casual stroll through a neighborhood park. But her eyes were busy. She noted the placement of security cameras, the response time of maintenance crews, the shift patterns of security personnel. She observed which species clustered together and which ones actively avoided each other. She counted emergency exits and memorized the locations of communication hubs. To any casual observer, she was just another new student getting oriented. The reality was somewhat more complex. Near the main engineering section, Maya heard a sound that didn't belong in the typical symphony of station noises. A low moan, followed by what sounded like metal scraping against metal. She followed the sound down a maintenance corridor that most students never knew existed. A molluscoid maintenance worker lay trapped under a support beam that had fallen during routine repairs. The being's translucent skin had turned a distressed shade of purple, and its gill slits were fluttering rapidly in what Maya recognized as respiratory distress. "Help," the molluscoid wheezed in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "Beam too heavy, can't breathe." Maya knelt beside the trapped worker and assessed the situation. The support beam was solid durasteel, approximately 2 meters long and probably weighing close to 300 kilograms. For most species on the station, moving it would require mechanical assistance or a team of strong individuals. Maya wrapped her hands around the beam, planted her feet, and lifted. The beam rose smoothly, as if it were made of lightweight polymer instead of military-grade metal. The molluscoid slithered free, its skin cycling through several shades of surprised green before settling on grateful blue. How did you?" The worker stammered. Maya lowered the beam carefully to the floor. "Basic leverage." "Are you hurt? Should I call medical?" The molluscoid performed a quick self-examination, checking each of its 8 limbs and testing its gill function. No serious damage. But that beam, it should have taken 4 Gorvani to lift. "Physics can be funny sometimes," Maya said with a smile that somehow managed to be both reassuring and completely non-explanatory. "You should probably report the structural failure to engineering. That beam didn't fall by accident." As Maya walked away, the molluscoid stared after her, then at the beam, then back at her retreating figure. In its long career maintaining station infrastructure, it had seen beings of incredible strength. But they were always obviously strong. Massive frames, visible musculature, species known for their physical power. This small, soft-looking mammal had just casually lifted 300 kilograms of durasteel like she was moving a piece of furniture. The molluscoid's skin cycled through confused yellow, troubled orange, and finally settled on contemplative purple. Some things, it decided, were worth mentioning in the daily maintenance report. Some things definitely were. Back in Security Central, Korath was reviewing the day's routine reports when a notation caught his attention. A maintenance incident, Section C7 corridor, structural failure, no injuries reported. Assistance provided by he scrolled down to read the witness statement. Student Maya Chen, human female. Lifted support beam estimated at 300 kilograms to free trapped worker. Korath's tongue flicked out in irritation. Probably a typo. 30 kilograms, maybe. These mammal species are always exaggerating their capabilities. He marked the report as minor incident and moved on to more pressing matters. After all, what possible threat could one small human pose to a station designed to handle the galaxy's most dangerous species? That question would keep him awake in exactly 24 hours. Dr. Venth of the insectoid Cathara species had been teaching xenobiology for 47 standard years, long enough to predict exactly how each species would approach complex problems. The Hexari would calculate everything down to 17 decimal places. The Gorvani would try to smash their way to a solution. The molluscoids would flow around obstacles like water finding the path of least resistance. Humans, according to her files, were supposed to be unremarkable middle-ground mammals with basic cognitive abilities and a tendency toward emotional decision-making. Maya Chen was making Dr. Venth reconsider her entire career. "The question, Doctor." Venth clicked in her precise, academic tone, is how to safely extract a volatile compound from the digestive system of a living plasma worm without triggering its explosive defense mechanism. Standard protocols require a 14-step surgical procedure taking approximately 6 hours. Miss Chen. Your approach. Maya raised her hand with the same casual confidence she'd shown while lifting that support beam. Why not just give it really bad indigestion? The classroom fell silent. Zilf's crystalline structure dimmed in what passed for confusion among her species. Brant's massive head tilted at an angle that suggested his brain was attempting to reboot. Dr. Venth's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of either amusement or impending academic fury. Please elaborate. Well, Maya said, standing and moving to the holographic display. Plasma worms are essentially living chemical reactors, right? Their digestive process depends on maintaining specific pH levels. If you introduce a mild alkaline compound, nothing dangerous. Just something that makes them really uncomfortable. She manipulated the hologram, showing the worms' internal chemistry. They'd naturally purge their system. The volatile compound comes out the easy way and everyone goes home happy. Dr. Venth stared at the display. In 4 decades of teaching, she'd never seen anyone solve the plasma worm problem in under 30 seconds. The standard approach required advanced surgical techniques, specialized equipment, and considerable risk to both patient and surgeon. Maya's solution would work. It was brilliant, simple, and completely insane by conventional standards. That, Dr. Venth said slowly, would cause the creature significant discomfort. Maya shrugged. Better than 6 hours of surgery. Besides, it's temporary. Like giving someone with food poisoning some antacid, except backwards. The professor's compound eyes whirred as they focused on Maya with new interest. Where did you learn to think in such unconventional patterns? Basic problem solving, I guess. My dad always said if you're overthinking something, you're probably missing the obvious answer. After class, the other students clustered in small groups, their conversations buzzing with speculation about the new human. Maya, oblivious to her growing reputation, headed to the recreational facilities for what the course catalog optimistically called interspecies physical fitness. The gymnasium was a marvel of engineering, with adjustable gravity fields, atmospheric controls, and safety systems designed to prevent accidental fatalities during routine exercise. Most species used it for gentle calisthenics or low-impact activities. The combat training section, however, was where things got interesting. Instructor Grex, a Vorthak warrior whose scales bore the ritual scars of 17 honor duels, was demonstrating basic defensive techniques to a mixed group of students. Combat, he hissed, is about understanding your opponent's capabilities and exploiting their weaknesses. Each species has natural advantages and disadvantages. He gestured to the assembled students. Molluscoids are flexible, but lack structural integrity. Hexari are precise but brittle. Gorvani are powerful but slow. Understanding these limitations is the first step to. Maya raised her hand. Could I volunteer for a demonstration? Rex's tongue flicked out in amusement. Certainly. Step forward, small mammal. The first opponent was Kresh, a mid-sized razorclaw with natural weapons that could slice through metal plating. Kresh approached Maya with the confidence of a predator confronting prey, his claws extended and gleaming. Maya waited until he was close enough, then did something no razorclaw had ever encountered in 10,000 years of evolutionary combat experience. She grabbed his wrist, stepped behind him, and used his own momentum to flip him completely over her shoulder. Kresh landed on his back with a sound like a sack of confused vegetables hitting the floor. How did you? Kresh wheezed, staring up at the ceiling with the expression of someone whose entire worldview had just been turned upside down. Judo, Maya said helpfully. It's about using your opponent's strength against them. Grex's inner eyelids flickered, a sign of deep confusion in Vorthak physiology. Again, with a different opponent. The second challenger was Thox, a Gorvani built like a walking siege engine. Thox had approximately 6 times Maya's body weight and arms that could bend steel bars. He approached her with the steady, inevitable advance of a glacier. Maya waited until he reached for her, then dropped low, swept his legs, and watched 3 meters of confused Gorvani crash to the mat like a felled tree. basic wrestling, Maya explained to Grex's increasingly frantic expression. Sometimes the bigger they are, the harder they fall. The third opponent was Sparkle, a Hexari whose crystalline structure could cut like diamond and whose reflexes operated at nearly superhuman speed. Sparkle approached Maya with mathematical precision, calculating angles of attack with geometric perfection. Maya simply stepped inside Sparkle's reach and tapped her gently on what passed for a solar plexus among crystal-based life forms. Sparkle's entire structure resonated at exactly the wrong frequency, and she collapsed into a pile of very confused gemstones. Resonance physics, Maya said matter-of-factly. Everything has a natural frequency. Grex stood motionless for a full minute, processing what he'd just witnessed. In his long career as a combat instructor, he'd seen students excel in various ways: superior strength, speed, technique, or strategy. But he'd never seen anyone casually defeat three completely different species using three completely different approaches, all of which seemed to violate basic assumptions about interspecies combat. Where he finally managed, "Did you learn these techniques?" "Oh, basic stuff from childhood," Maya replied, brushing dust off her shirt. "Judo from community classes, wrestling from school, and the physics thing from helping my mom tune musical instruments. You know, typical kid stuff." The gymnasium had gone completely silent. Every student, every instructor, even the automated safety systems, seemed to be staring at Maya with expressions ranging from awe to existential terror. Bront was the first to find his voice. "You learned combat techniques as a child?" "For recreation." Maya laughed, a sound that in the sudden silence seemed absurdly cheerful. "Combat? Oh no, these weren't combat classes. Judo was for fun, wrestling was a school sport, and the physics thing was just helping out around the house. We didn't start actual combat training until we were older." "Actual combat training?" whispered Zilf, her crystalline structure flickering with what could only be described as primal fear. "Sure. Survival swimming in shark-infested waters, rock climbing without safety gear, wilderness camping where you had to avoid predators and find your own food. Basic outdoor education. Most kids on Earth do it." The silence stretched longer. Somewhere in the distance, a ventilation system hummed. A door closed with mechanical precision. The sounds of normal station life continued, but in the gymnasium, 47 beings from different worlds stared at one small human with the dawning realization that their understanding of the universe had just shifted slightly off its axis. Dr. Venth, who had been observing from the doorway, made a note on her datapad. "Recommend immediate review of human species classification. Current threat assessment may be inadequate." In Security Central, automated systems flagged the gymnasium footage for review. The AI's threat assessment algorithms, designed to identify potential dangers through behavioral analysis, had been running increasingly complex calculations for the past hour. Species human, the AI updated its files. Threat level, recalculating. Korath would receive that report in approximately 6 hours. By then, his understanding of harmless mammals was about to become significantly more complicated. The Grimlock Raiders had earned their reputation the hard way, by being spectacularly violent, cunningly brutal, and possessed of exactly zero moral flexibility. Their ships were flying scrapyards held together by spite and plasma welds, crewed by beings who had been kicked out of organizations that actively recruited psychopaths. Captain Snaggletooth, whose name was unfortunately accurate, commanded the Raider fleet from his flagship Painbringer, a vessel that looked like someone had strapped engines to an asteroid and armed it with weapons designed by particularly creative sadists. Station Omega-7, Snaggletooth growled into his communications array. "Surrender immediately or we'll blast you into component atoms and sell the pretty pieces." In Security Central, Korath's day went from routine paperwork to nightmare scenario in the time it took his emergency klaxons to cycle through their opening bars. Red lights bathed the command center in the color of impending doom, and his tactical displays lit up with enough incoming threats to make a seasoned warrior consider early retirement. 17 ships, reported Sergeant Thren, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. A mixed configuration, heavy weapons, and they've somehow compromised our outer defense grid. Korath's claws extended involuntarily, scraping against his command console. How many compromised systems? 30% of our defensive capabilities are offline. Someone fed them our security codes. The implications hit Korath like a plasma bolt to the brain. The Grimlock Raiders were known for many things, but sophisticated cyber warfare wasn't one of them. They usually announced their presence by shooting first and asking questions of the survivors. All students to emergency shelters, Korath commanded. Security teams Alpha through Delta, defensive positions. And someone tell me how a gang of violent idiots managed to hack our systems. The student emergency shelter in Section C7 had been designed to protect young minds from the traumatic realities of space warfare. Reinforced walls, independent life support, and enough emergency supplies to keep several hundred beings alive for weeks. The shelter's automated systems activated with soothing tones and gentle lighting designed to reduce stress. Maya Chen looked around the shelter, noted the positions of air vents, emergency exits, and communication panels, then quietly walked toward the back wall where the main ventilation intake was located. "Where are you going?" asked Zilf, her crystalline structure flickering with nervous energy. "Bathroom," Maya replied with the kind of casual mendacity that had gotten her out of trouble throughout her childhood. The ventilation grate was secured with standard fasteners designed to prevent accidental access. Maya removed them with her fingernails in approximately 15 seconds, slipped into the ductwork, disappeared into the station's mechanical circulatory system like a particularly determined ghost. Meanwhile, aboard the Painbringer, Captain Snaggletooth was experiencing the kind of mourning that made him question his life choices. It had started well enough. The station's defenses were partially disabled, his ships had achieved superior positioning, and the preliminary bombardment had knocked out several key systems. Then things got weird. "Captain," reported his weapons officer, a scarred razorclaw named Ripgut, "the port plasma cannon just stopped working." "Define stopped working," Snaggletooth snarled. "It fired once, made a sound like someone strangling a molluscoid, and now it won't respond to commands. The diagnostic systems say everything's fine, but the weapon is completely dead." Before Snaggletooth could respond, his communications officer chimed in with equally disturbing news. "Sir, Ship 7 reports their engines have shut down. Ship 12 says their navigation computer is displaying what appears to be a recipe for something called chocolate chip cookies." Snaggletooth's remaining teeth ground together with mechanical precision. "Are you telling me that our sophisticated military operation is being sabotaged by baked goods?" "No, sir. I'm telling you that someone has infiltrated Ship 12's computer systems and replaced the navigation database with what appears to be a collection of human recreational cooking instructions." The situation deteriorated rapidly from there. Ship after ship reported mysterious failures, equipment malfunctions, and increasingly bizarre computer glitches. The Death's Head found its weapons systems had been programmed to fire confetti instead of plasma bolts. The Revenge of Sorrow discovered that someone had rerouted their life support systems to pump the crew quarters full of a gas that smelled exactly like fresh-baked bread. Most disturbing of all were the crew reports. Pirates throughout the fleet were being found unconscious in their quarters, engineering sections, and weapons bays. No wounds, no signs of struggle, just sudden, inexplicable unconsciousness followed by very confused awakenings. Post-attacks, reported the captain of the Screaming Vengeance, his voice edged with the kind of fear usually reserved for tax auditors and marriage counselors. "Something's moving through our ships. We can't see it, can't track it, but our crew keeps falling asleep." In Security Central, Korath was monitoring the situation with growing bewilderment. His tactical displays showed the Raider fleet in complete disarray. Ships drifting without power, weapons systems offline, and communications channels filled with increasingly panicked reports of invisible saboteurs. "Sir," Thren reported, "I'm tracking unusual activity in the station's ventilation systems. Something's moving through the ductwork, but it's too small to be any of our security personnel." Korath's tongue flicked out in concentration. "Too small how?" "Approximately 1.7 meters in length," 60 kilograms mass, moving at speeds that should be impossible in confined spaces. A cold realization began forming in Korath's reptilian brain. He pulled up the student roster, specifically the humans. There was only one on the station. One small, soft mammal who had been dismissed as harmless. "Pull up the emergency shelter surveillance," he ordered. The footage showed students huddled together in the shelter's main area. Zilf's nervous flickering, Brant's stoic immobility, and one very obvious absence. "Where," Korath hissed, "is Maya Chen?" The answer came 30 minutes later in the form of a ventilation grate being kicked open in the security central's main corridor. Maya Chen dropped through the opening like a particularly athletic spider, covered in grease, sparks, and what appeared to be the remnants of several different ships' worth of electronics. She was also dragging Captain Snaggletooth behind her. The pirate captain was unconscious, wrapped in what looked like emergency cable, and wearing an expression of profound confusion even in his sleep. Maya pulled him through the ventilation grate with the casual efficiency of someone taking out the garbage. "Hey," she said to the dozen heavily armed security officers who were pointing weapons at her. "I brought you the guy in charge. The rest of his crew should be waking up in a few hours with really bad headaches and a sudden craving for baked goods." Korath stared at her. What exactly did you do?" Maya wiped grease off her hands with a cloth that had definitely not been cleaned to begin with. "Basic maintenance stuff. Disabled their weapons by rerouting power couplings, shut down their engines by introducing incompatible command codes, and dealt with the crew using pressure points I learned in first aid class." "First aid class?" Thren's voice cracked slightly. "Sure. You learn where to press to help people stay conscious, and you learn where to press to help them take a nice nap. It's all about blood flow to the brain." Korath looked at Captain Snaggletooth, then at Maya, then at the tactical display showing 17 ships worth of disabled pirates floating helplessly in space. "You disabled an entire pirate fleet," he said slowly, "using maintenance techniques and first aid." Maya shrugged. "Plus some basic computer programming. I might have introduced a few viruses into their systems while I was rerouting things. Nothing harmful, just some fun stuff to keep them busy when they wake up." "Fun stuff?" "Well, their navigation computers now think they're kitchen appliances, their weapons systems have been reprogrammed to display poetry instead of targeting data, and their communications arrays will only transmit in what I think is an ancient Earth language called Pig Latin." The security central fell silent, except for the gentle humming of life support systems and the distant sound of Korath's worldview cracking under pressure. "How?" he finally managed. "Did you access their ships?" "Docking tube maintenance ports," Maya explained helpfully. "Most species don't design security around beings who can fit through spaces they consider too small for intelligent life. Plus, I spent a lot of time exploring caves back home. Really tight spaces don't bother me." Sergeant Thren looked at the unconscious pirate captain, then at Maya. "Cave exploration was also childhood recreation?" "Oh yeah, spelunking, rock climbing, urban exploration, parkour, standard outdoor activities." Maya paused thoughtfully. "Though I guess the urban exploration was technically illegal. But it taught me a lot about building infrastructure and security systems." Korath made a note on his datapad with claws that shook slightly. "Immediate priority, comprehensive review of all human capabilities. Previous threat assessment, criminally inadequate." Outside the viewports, 17 disabled pirate ships drifted in space like confused metal whales, their crews slowly awakening to discover their navigation systems were suggesting recipe modifications, and their weapons displays were showing love sonnets in languages they didn't recognize. The Grimlock Raiders had terrorized star systems across 3 galactic arms. They had brought down space stations, conquered planets, and made hardened warriors wake up screaming. They had just been comprehensively defeated by one human college student using what she considered basic life skills. Captain Snaggletooth would eventually wake up in a high-security holding cell, stare at the ceiling for several hours, and quietly request to be transferred to a prison on a planet with no human population. Some experiences, he would later tell prison counselors, were simply too traumatic for rehabilitation. The post-incident debriefing took place in Conference Room Alpha 7, a space designed to accommodate the galaxy's most important diplomatic discussions. Today it felt more like a support group for beings whose understanding of reality had been fundamentally altered. Security Chief Korath sat at the head of the polished metal table, surrounded by department heads, station administrators, and one small human who was casually eating what appeared to be a sandwich while 17 different species stared at her with expressions ranging from awe to existential dread. "Let me make sure I understand the situation correctly," began Station Administrator Quelix, a dignified molluscoid whose usual composure had developed several concerning cracks. A single first-year xenobiology student neutralized 60% of the Grimlock Raider threat using maintenance techniques? Maya swallowed a bite of her sandwich and nodded. 63%, technically. I didn't get to 3 of their ships before they surrendered. Dr. Venth's mandibles clicked rapidly as she reviewed her datapad. The security footage is illuminating. Miss Chen, you moved through environmental systems that maintain temperatures of 200 degrees Celsius, atmospheric pressure differentials that would crush most beings, and radiation levels that should have been immediately fatal. "Oh, that," Maya said with a casual wave of her hand. "Humans are pretty good at environmental adaptation. We evolved as persistence hunters on a world with extreme climate variations, high heat tolerance, decent radiation resistance, and we can function in low oxygen environments for extended periods." Chief Medical Officer Blenth, whose 4 arms were designed for precise surgical work, gestured helplessly at the air. The atmospheric composition in some of those ventilation shafts contained compounds that are toxic to 90% of known species. Maya shrugged. "We're also really good at processing toxins. Had to be, considering some of the stuff we learned to eat during our evolutionary development. Plus, I held my breath for most of the really bad sections." "How long?" Dr. Venth asked in the tone of someone afraid of the answer. "Can humans hold their breath?" "Depends on the person and their training. I'm not particularly good at it, maybe 4 or 5 minutes under stress. Some humans can go much longer." The silence that followed this statement was profound enough to have its own gravitational field. Engineering Chief Torvin, a Gorvani whose species prided itself on physical resilience, spoke in a voice that sounded like he was questioning everything he'd ever believed. "The structural spaces you crawled through the access tunnels were never designed for intelligent life. The clearances are barely sufficient for maintenance drones. Humans are really good at fitting through tight spaces," Maya explained helpfully. "Persistence hunting required chasing prey through caves, rock formations, dense forest. We got good at squeezing through gaps and moving in 3 dimensions." She paused to take another bite of her sandwich. "Plus, we're pattern recognition specialists. Once I figured out the basic layout of their ships, it was pretty easy to predict where the important systems would be located. Most species design things logically, so if you understand the logic, you can navigate even unfamiliar technology." Dr. Venth made rapid notes on her datapad. Pattern recognition, environmental adaptation, toxin resistance, extreme temperature tolerance, enhanced flexibility, extended anaerobic capacity. She looked up at Maya with the expression of someone whose entire academic specialty had just been turned inside out. "Miss Chen, what you're describing isn't evolution for intelligence. It's evolution for survival in conditions that would be considered uninhabitable by galactic standards." Maya considered this. "Well, Earth is kind of a hostile place. Extreme weather, predators, natural disasters, poisonous plants and animals everywhere. Most humans spend their childhood learning to recognize and avoid immediate death from environmental hazards. And this is normal? For your species? Sure. Basic childhood education includes things like identifying dangerous wildlife, finding safe drinking water, emergency medical treatment, fire starting, shelter construction, and navigation using natural landmarks." Commander Strex of Station Defense looked up from his tactical analysis. "Our combat assessment indicates that you neutralized approximately 47 armed pirates using non-lethal techniques." I didn't want to hurt anyone permanently, Maya said, sounding slightly apologetic. They were just doing their job, even if their job was kind of antisocial. Most of them will wake up with headaches and some confusion, but no lasting damage. How did you render them unconscious without weapons? Maya held up her hands and wiggled her fingers. Pressure points mostly. Humans have really good fine motor control and haptic feedback. You learn where to press to stop blood flow or disrupt nerve signals. It's useful for medical emergencies, but it works in reverse too. Dr. Venth's compound eyes whirred as they focused on Maya's hands with new intensity. You're describing capabilities that would be considered advanced combat techniques among warrior species. No, not combat techniques. Safety techniques. If someone's injured and you need to stop bleeding, or if they're having a seizure and you need to prevent them from hurting themselves. The same knowledge that helps save lives can be used to, well, make people take involuntary naps. The conference room fell silent again. Somewhere in the station's depths, life support systems hummed their eternal mechanical song. Environmental processors recycled air that had been breathed by beings from dozens of worlds, and 47 of the galaxy's most dangerous pirates sat in holding cells, slowly recovering from what would probably be the most embarrassing defeat in criminal history. Station Administrator Quellick spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of someone making a decision that would affect interstellar policy. Chief Korath, I want a complete review of all human students, tourists, and residents currently on this station. Already in progress, sir, Korath replied. I'm also preparing a report for the Galactic Council recommending immediate reclassification of human threat assessment levels. From negligible to what? Korath's claws tapped against the table surface. I'm thinking approach with extreme caution might be appropriate. Maya looked around the table with genuine confusion. Did I do something wrong? I mean, I know I left the shelter without permission, but there were people in danger. Dr. Venth leaned forward, her academic excitement overriding her survival instincts. Miss Chen, in your opinion, what percentage of humans could have accomplished what you did today? Maya thought about it seriously. With the right training? Maybe 70%. Without specific training, but with basic education? Probably 40 or 50%. I mean, most humans learn this stuff growing up. And the other 50%? Oh, they'd find completely different ways to solve the problem. Humans are really good at improvisation and creative problem solving. No two humans would approach the same challenge exactly the same way. Dr. Venth made another note. Species demonstrates extreme individual variation in capabilities while maintaining consistently high baseline competency and survival skills. She looked up at Maya with the expression of a researcher who had just stumbled across the discovery of a lifetime. Miss Chen, would you be interested in participating in a comprehensive study of human physiology and psychology? For science? Maya grinned, and somehow that simple expression made every being in the room slightly nervous. Sure. Sounds fun. Korath's report to the Galactic Council would eventually run to 847 pages and include the phrase recommend immediate diplomatic contact with Earth government to establish formal relationship protocols no fewer than 37 times. The Grimlock Raiders, meanwhile, would eventually be released from custody after serving their sentences. Captain Snaggletooth would retire from piracy and open a small restaurant specializing in comfort food. He would never explain why the sound of human laughter made him hide under tables, and his former crew would never discuss the nightmares about small but soft mammals who moved through shadows and turned their ship's computers into poetry dispensers. Some traumas, they discovered, were simply too profound for rehabilitation. 3 weeks after what station historians would eventually record as the incident that redefined interspecies relations, life aboard Omega-7 had settled into a new rhythm. Maya Chen continued attending her xenobiology classes, submitting assignments on time, and helping her plant roommate Bloom with photosynthesis optimization problems. The fact that she had single-handedly defeated 17 ships' worth of pirates seemed to affect her daily routine approximately as much as a minor change in the cafeteria menu. Maya, Zilph approached her after advanced biochemistry, her crystalline structure flickering with nervous energy. "I have a theoretical problem that my professors say is unsolvable." Maya looked up from her notes on plasma worm digestion cycles. "What kind of theoretical problem?" "How to safely transport a quantum crystal through a solar storm without disrupting its molecular matrix. The energy fluctuations would normally shatter any crystalline structure, but my homeworld needs the crystal for our atmospheric processors." Maya considered this for exactly 12 seconds. "Could you wrap it in a magnetic field generator tuned to create interference patterns that cancel out the storm frequencies?" Zilf's entire body went dark, then blazed with sudden illumination. That would actually work. The harmonic resonance would create a protective envelope. She paused, staring at Maya with something approaching religious awe. "How did you know that?" "Radio interference," Maya explained helpfully. "Back home, we had to deal with solar storms disrupting communications all the time. Same basic physics, just scaled up." Word spread through the student population with the efficiency of gossip and the persistence of a biological virus. Maya became the unofficial consultant for problems that professors had labeled unsolvable, impossible, or contrary to known physics. Grant sought her help with a structural engineering challenge that had stumped Gorvani architects for generations. Maya suggested using flexible joints instead of rigid supports, explaining that humans had learned to build earthquake-resistant structures by allowing buildings to move with seismic forces rather than fighting them. The solution worked perfectly. Dr. Venth found herself completely rewriting the xenobiology curriculum after Maya casually solved 16 different theoretical impossibilities during a single semester. Her research notes now included a special section labeled Human Perspective Solutions. That was quickly becoming the most referenced part of her academic work. Station protocols had been quietly updated to reflect new realities. Emergency procedures now included a subsection on human environmental capabilities that essentially boiled down to "don't worry about the humans, they'll probably be fine." Maintenance schedules were adjusted after Maya volunteered to inspect systems in areas previously considered inaccessible to organic life. The most significant change, however, occurred during new student orientations. Security Chief Korath now personally conducted a special briefing that had become legendary among the student population. He would stand before each incoming class, gesture to a holographic display showing Maya's academic photo, and deliver what had become known as the speech. This, he would say, his forked tongue flicking out for emphasis, is Maya Chen. She appears to be a small, soft mammal with no natural weapons, minimal physical mass, and a tendency to smile at inappropriate times. The new students would look at the image and nod, seeing exactly what Korath was describing. She is also, he would continue, single-handedly responsible for defeating the Grimlock Raider fleet, solving 17 previously impossible academic problems, and forcing us to completely rewrite our understanding of what constitutes a harmless species. The inevitable confused murmuring would follow, which Korath would silence with a raised claw. The lesson here is simple: never, ever assume you understand a species based on their appearance, their apparent physical capabilities, or their cheerful disposition. Maya Chen has taught us that the most dangerous beings in the galaxy might be the ones who offer to help you with your homework. He would pause for effect, letting that sink in. She is still available for tutoring in advanced problem-solving, by the way. I recommend her services highly. In his private office, Korath would often reflect on how one small human had fundamentally altered not just station operations, but his entire worldview. 23 years of security experience had taught him to categorize threats based on obvious indicators: size, weapons, species reputation, aggressive behavior. Maya Chen had politely demolished every assumption in his threat assessment protocols while offering to help with his own children's homework problems. His reports to the Galactic Council had grown progressively more philosophical over the weeks. His latest submission included the phrase "recommend complete reevaluation of species classification methodology," and a footnote suggesting that apparent harmlessness might itself be a form of advanced camouflage. The station AI, meanwhile, had been struggling with its own existential crisis. Its threat assessment algorithms had been running continuous calculations for weeks, trying to properly categorize human capabilities based on available data. Species, human, it noted in its daily logs. Height, 1.67 meters. Weight, 58.7 kilograms. Threat level, recalculating. Deep in its quantum processing cores, the AI had reached a conclusion that would have amused Maya if she'd known about it, but some things were simply too complex for mathematical analysis. Humans, it had decided, defied calculation not because they were beyond logic, but because they approached logic from directions that other species had never considered. The AI updated its files one final time. Species, human. Threat level, yes. It was, the AI reflected, the most accurate assessment it had ever made.